Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LocoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin Conlon, owner of Team LocoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com.
All right, and we are back once again with Coach Sam.
Hello.
And today's podcast is going to be a question that was sent in, and this is actually from a coaching perspective. So this is a really common situation, so everybody listening can benefit from it, but especially if you are a coach, I'm sure you have run into this exact situation. So let me read it. Oh, wow, I already messed it up. Great question.
I was like, where did she go with this?
Excellent intro. Wow. Okay. Clear my throat. All right. What do you do with clients who don't grasp the concept of tracking macros right away? I feel like I have clients that are just missing it. I send over a macro tracking ebook that I've put together. I send sample meal templates and I coach them on how to eat to reach their goals. But sometimes it will take them 2 to 3 months to just understand that. I'm all for habit building and teaching clients things, especially tracking macros, because it teaches you so much about food. But I also want the clients to reach their goals. And it's tough when you're spending 2 to 3 months just trying to get them to hit their initial goals. These clients also struggle the most to just be consistent. Wondering what advice you have here. So really common situation. Somebody's first starting, and whether it's macros or habits or really anything, they're just not necessarily, the client might not be grasping it, or it's just really hard for them to make any progress and be consistent. And I would say that almost everybody runs into this, and it doesn't matter what style of eating that even if you have a meal plan, which is, obviously very straightforward, people can still struggle because they might either just, the whole problem with meal plans is falling off of it, not knowing what else to do. So there's just so many ways. It doesn't matter what type of eating that you're doing, besides just fasting. There's going to be some variation here, and some people are going to pick it up faster than others. So the first point that I wanted to make here is that as the coach, you have to step back and realize that your timeline might not be their timeline. So you might be sitting on the other side of the screen or the other side of the room, depending on how you're coaching somebody. And you could be thinking, oh my gosh, we've been spending 2 to 3 months doing this. I feel like we're running in circles. I feel like we're not making any progress. Why is it going so slow? Why are they not being consistent? Why are they always going back to reverting to their old behaviors? But to them, and if you actually detach from this, they actually are making progress. It might not be as fast as you would like, but they are still moving forward, and this is still better than what they were doing before. Now, is it night and day different? Maybe not, but it still could be nominally better for them, and that is going to be a step in the right direction. So just as kind of like the big picture view here, we really have to always, as coaches or anybody who's, working in this capacity, understand, okay, my timeline is not their timeline. You have to, of course, keep them in check. If they're like, hey, I want to, I have this goal for the next 12 weeks. I go, okay, well, we need to keep somebody on track for that. But ultimately, you are giving somebody the tools to be successful, but they are the ones who are executing it. And you have to hold them accountable to those goals and help them through the hiccups. But if they're still moving forward and they're happy with what they're doing, then that is still progress.
Yeah. And like with that too, it's great to set that expectation up front with them. Like, what is your timeline? What are we looking to do? Like, when would you like to, achieve X, Y, Z? One, so that we can make sure that that's a realistic expectation, that we can all be on the same page and all that stuff too. But so that you can help them along that, so that when, if their goal is to, be doing something by 2 months, if you're not getting there by 2 months, then yeah, that maybe is more of a problem. But it could be something where, like, I'm just trying to live a healthier lifestyle. I want this to stick. I want to be consistent. Okay, then if it takes 2 months, it takes 2 months. That's okay. And it does sometimes take people 2 months. But we'll get into why that might be too.
Yeah. And I think just, again, understanding where somebody is, what their goals are. Now, if you set this up, right, and they say, okay, right, in 3 months, these are my goals. And as the coach, they seem like feasible goals, not like, hey, in 12 weeks, I want to be this completely different person. Like, all right, what can we actually do in 12 weeks? And if the person is not following through with the program, but then they're also on the other side saying, well, why am I not seeing progress? That's where you have to be like, hey, this is why, you're not doing X, Y, Z, and we need to adjust this, which is what we're going to get into next. But if they're happy with what they're doing and they're just going a little bit slower than maybe expected, that's also okay. And this happens not just in this situation. This happens a lot especially when we're working with clients on, adding in more flexibility with their mindset around food. It's a very slow process, and it's not something that's really measurable. So a lot of times it can feel like a struggle on your end as a coach. Like, my God, like, why can't, because you're on the other side of it. You're like, why can't they just get it? Why can't they just go and have a meal at a food-centric event? Go listen to our last podcast. Why do they have to have all these compensatory behaviors? Why can they not just do all this stuff? Why? It's going to take them a little bit longer. And because you as the coach are likely, hopefully, on the other side of any of those issues, it can seem like, well, this is so easy. Why can't somebody just get here? But that's completely negating all of the time that you've spent, possibly years, getting to the place that you've gotten to. So we need to kind of reel that back, right? My lens and my experience and my knowledge is not necessarily where the client is. I need to meet them where they are. And if we can take 3 steps forward, even if they're baby steps, that's still exciting. So let's get into a little bit more of the, the actual strategy here. And so the main question is why, right? And that's what I want you to get into, because that's what you brought up. And it was such a great, like, so many questions. Okay, it's not just, okay, you're not hitting it. Why are we not hitting it?
And that's exactly the first question you have to ask, especially when we're talking about macros here, like going back to that specific question, they're not getting macros. We have to look at why. It's not like they're just not, in most cases, they're not just not doing it. It's a lot of times there's a barrier for them they're not understanding, or that they have to overcome in order to get it. And so a couple of things it could be is that they don't understand what they're trying to do. And an ebook is great. Meal plans are great, but like we're going to talk about later, that might not be the medium that they need. That might not have been enough for them to understand what they're trying to do. And in most cases, like we talk about macros all day long, and like I was just talking upstairs, my parents are here watching my son, and my dad was like, what are you doing for a podcast? I'm like, we're talking about what if someone doesn't get macros? And he goes, what's a macro again? Like, there's a lot of people out there who that's their level of understanding. So to just say, like, here are your macros and here's a book about it, that might not be enough. So maybe they're lacking understanding. Another thing it could be, and this comes up for a lot of people, is they don't have time, or they're lacking time to do the planning and the work that it takes to hit a macro target. And again, for people who have done this for a long time, it feels really easy to hit a number. For people who have never done this before, it is so hard, and you have to put yourself back in that person's shoes of what it was like the first couple times you tracked. It's not easy to hit 3 targets, and so maybe they're lacking the time to plan ahead and to hit those numbers. And then another thing it could be, and this is something that I would not assume unless they actually express this to me, but it could be a lack of effort. That I know I said I wanted this goal, I know I said I wanted to do this, I just haven't really tried, I haven't really work towards this right now. Like, I don't want to, or I don't have the capacity to. And if that's the case, like, okay, then this is probably going to take longer. But having the understanding and having and knowing that they're not putting in the effort can be something that's holding them back too. So those are just a few things that could be a why they're not getting it. But being able to understand why then can give you that lane of approach to say, okay, you don't have time, well, let's make this easier for you, let's help lower that barrier so that we can get this done with less time. Or, oh, you don't want to put in this much effort right now, okay, well, maybe tracking all your macros isn't for you right now, maybe we lower that goal so that you can put in the effort. And if you're not understanding it, okay, then what do we need to do to help you understand it? But we have to know that before we can approach that.
Yeah, I would say that the most common situation with a client trying to understand tracking, right? And tracking is a tool. It's a really great tool, but it should be utilized as a tool and not this thing that, oh, if I can't track perfectly, I can't track at all. There is nothing to say that if you didn't have a food scale or a tracking app, that you still couldn't track macros, right? You can 100% still track. Is it going to be all dialed in? No, it might be 95% correct, right? Or 90%. But the idea of tracking macros specifically is not because, okay, I plugged this in perfectly and where's my food scale? Is that grain of rice on there? That's not what this is about. It's about, okay, roughly, this is what I'm going to eat in a meal. And if you can look at it in a different way, instead of this, like, I'm just tracking as I'm going and I'm going to eat this and I'm going to scan it, I'm going to plug it in. I just find that people really, really struggle when they do that. And at first it can be easy because it's like, okay, I'm just trying to figure out like what I'm eating in a day. But when we're trying to do it on a consistent basis, that really seems to backfire for people. And I never really recognized that because I never did that. So I was always like, I don't really get these kind of struggles. Like, why is it a struggle to be flexible or to eat out or to estimate? Because that's what I was always doing. I never used a tracking app, and I used a food scale for certain things, but I never really just tracked on the fly. Like, I was kind of planning things, and I always did these little intuitive things that just made it easier for me to stick to it. And I recognized as I coached more people that that was not the case, and that they were just making it harder on themselves by not doing that. So a lot of times it's just also understanding, okay, like, where are you confused about this? And it doesn't matter what you're eating or where you're eating or anything like that. You can still track and you can still have an estimation of what this is. People really struggle here with like multi-ingredient foods too, right? Like, oh, I can't track that. I don't know what's in it.
I know what's in there. Yeah.
Well, it's not going to be a perfect number, but we can have a rough, especially if you made it, right? You might not know, again, exactly, like if you're at a restaurant, like it's going to be hard to know. Assume more fat than not, but there's going to be a lot of unknowns. If you made something at home, kind of, you can estimate it. If you made like a soup or like a chili or something, like that's a common, like, oh, how do I make that? I can't make it. Or like a dish like all together. Well, I don't know. Okay. You have an idea of what was in the total. And then let's just kind of make an educated guess on what is in here. And even if it's not perfect, I don't care if you're totally off. The fact that you set aside the mental capacity to say, all right, this is about 40 carbs, 30 protein, and 15 fat. We're going to call it that today and we're going to move forward. That's a really big win. Instead of going, I don't know what is in this chili or this meal out. And you know what? So I'm not going to track it and I don't get macros. Totally different way of looking at it.
Right. And that goes on to like the next point too, is like, how are you setting them up to meet their macros? How are you setting them up to track? Are you throwing 3 numbers at them and saying like, here you go, hit these 3 numbers within 5, or just hit them, go. Like I gave you an ebook, you know what they are now, hit them. Again, that's going to be way above someone's capacity if they're just starting out. And honestly, for people who maybe have done this for here or there, that still might be too much. So a couple of things that I would recommend trying for this coach, or for even if you're somebody out there who's just starting to track, start with 1 macro. And I would suggest protein because that's usually the one that's going to make the biggest difference in your physique and in your hunger and all of that. Start by just tracking your protein and trying to hit a protein goal. And then once you've nailed that, okay, I'm going to add in a carb goal and then add in a fat goal. And that does take time. Typically, it's like 1 to 2 weeks per macro for most people. And so that can add up, but most of the time they then have a better understanding of each one and why they're doing that too. And I like to use that as an educational tool. Okay, this week we're going to track carbs. This is what carbs are going to do for your body, blah, blah, blah. And then on top of that, when someone's just getting started, I like to start with macro windows, and as opposed to like a number. It's like, I want you to fall between these 2 numbers. And a lot of times that can help relieve that all or nothing mentality, because it's like, oh, if I don't have to hit this 1 number, but you said 140 grams of protein. Yeah, 140 grams of protein is ideal. But if you can fall between like 120 and 150, 160, like I'm gonna be happy, because you're probably gonna average out. And macros are not a perfect science. It's never going to be perfect. Like you can always think you're eating something, but you're probably not eating exactly 15 grams of protein when you're doing a super protein powder. It's just not happening. But giving them that window can really help with that, especially off at the start. And then that's also a tool I like to use when we're trying to get away from tracking rigidly and getting more into habit space, is like, okay, let's take away these hard numbers and let's just go into some ranges. And then eventually we'll go into some more untracked things. But having those windows with those macro ranges can be a really great tool. Again, just getting started, so that you take that pressure off of, you need to hit these specific numbers, because like you said, it can be really easy to be like, well, I can't hit that number, so I'm not going to try. And it's not so much about the number, it's about the consistency and about, getting to that point.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. It doesn't matter.
You're frozen on me.
Oh, am I good?
You're good.
I'm back. Okay. I wasn't frozen, so that's weird. I don't know. The internet. This is why I hate Zoom podcasts, but here we are because Sam lives in Michigan. So LOL from the last podcast. If you didn't listen. One time I'm probably gonna send you a package to Michigan by accident.
Yeah, go for it. Sam Holland, Michigan, will be stoked.
It's really, the way you broke that down was awesome, especially for people who are just getting into tracking and people who are also transitioning away from tracking, right? Like, it can be used in both scenarios. So the whole goal of what we try to do is to actually educate people for the long term, not just for one short amount of time, because anybody can do anything for a short amount of time. That doesn't really excite us. Certainly it's exciting for that short period of time, but if you're just going to do something for 3 months and then go completely backwards, and then also maybe possibly farther back than when you started, we're not interested in that. And then lastly, to kind of tie this up, and this goes for everybody that you're communicating with, but especially with the coach-client communication, it's just understanding different styles of communication, and running with what works. And everybody's going to be a little bit different here, and everybody's going to be different at different phases of their journey. So sometimes, if you're maybe the weekly updates have been really, really working great, but then you're at this sticking point, you're like, man, I really I've typed out everything in the best way possible. I've read everything that my client is telling me. I don't understand why this isn't working. Hey, can we get on a 15-minute phone call and you can just explain to me what your biggest struggle is right now? Things are totally solved. Now, is it usually that easy? No, but it can generally make the process easier. Some people, though, are better at typing than they are writing. Typing than they are speaking. So, right, so it's going to depend on the client, and what they're going to respond to. And then also not just the medium that works for them, but also how you are saying things, right? I've said certain things 100 times to people, okay, I know what we need to do. I'm saying it. This is what we got to do. And it's just not going. And then you will say the same thing, but repurpose it in a different way. And then it just clicks. How many times has that happened to you in your own life with something else not related to this? It happens to me all the time. I'll hear the same thing. I hear, okay, yeah. And then somebody will say it in a way that's basically the same shit, but the way that they put the words and their word choice, it just it resonated. And that's why we fall into certain categories where I love this person's stuff, right? I could say, I absolutely love this person's books, the way they speak, their podcasts, all this stuff. Another person's really? I didn't get anything out of their stuff, right?
Yeah.
There are certain people who have amazing, best-selling books that I'm I thought that was trash. Other people, right, it's their favorite thing, and then vice versa, right? It's just going to depend on the individual. And I think that it's important to find that and to continue to chip away and say, okay, how am I going to say this? And just try different styles to see what works for that client. And then, what worked before might not be working now. You might have been using a very, one approach with the person, and then now you're going to try a different one right now. And that's okay. And you have to be open to that. And that's where the intuitive nature of being a coach, and also just the listening aspect of being a coach, is so key. Because if you're putting yourself on default and you're yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, I know how they do stuff. Oh, but they've had this problem now for 3 weeks. It wasn't just a 1 week thing. This was 3 weeks in a row. Why is this happening now? Yeah. This way it needs to be adjusted.
Yeah. Not a whole lot to add to that. I would say that with with the different ways to communicate, it's really nice to be able to get on a call with someone if macros is what they're specifically struggling with, and like walk through like what are you currently doing, and how can we incorporate that to these new goals, as opposed to just being like, here's these foods that I listed out, here's this example meal plan, like, okay, now go build out your own. Because a lot of times like those foods aren't foods that people are already eating, and to ask them to completely overhaul their diet to hit these numbers with these specific foods that you laid out, like that's a lot. So if we can kind of incorporate what they're already doing to these new goals while incorporating new things, that can be super helpful. But that's not something that usually can be translated in text very well. So it's nice to get on a call for that. But it can be something that's, people need to see written out too. And that's something that I've definitely worked with clients on. But it'd be really helpful for them to have the autonomy to build out, a meal plan or a day for them, and then go through it together to say like what works, what doesn't, what we can change, how we can hit these numbers. But yeah, like you said, it's going to be different for everybody, and you need to be able to kind of observe what you've seen, what has worked for them, what hasn't, to make those choices. And sometimes it's great to just ask, like, hey, I know that I've noticed this is a problem. Like, would it be beneficial for you if we hopped on a call? And someone might say like, no, I'd rather not. And someone else might be like, oh yes, please, I just need to talk this out. But you're not going to know if you don't ask.
100%. So yeah, we really hope this was helpful for this person who sent in the question. And like I said, I know a lot of people would definitely be in this similar situation, especially if you were a coach. So if you do have a question for us, please send it in. I will put the Google form below. It is 100% anonymous. So please include as much detail as possible. And then either myself and one of the other coaches, or myself and Rick can tackle it if it's a more, mental health related question. We've had some really, really good ones. So definitely keep sending those in, you guys. And for any other questions, you can go to teamlocofit.com. You can send in a coaching application. You can send us a contact email, or you can read the other articles that we've put out on there as well. So thank you guys, as always, for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.